Metropolitan existing situation analysis is the reading of the current state of contemporary metropolises, acknowledging the diverse social, economic, political, environmental, and many other features constructing the metropolitan complexity and their influence on a specific metropolitan territorial context. The goal of metropolitan existing situation analysis is to investigate a metropolitan dimension to reduce the complexity into a metropolitan model. The metropolitan model is a selective representation of the complexity to evaluate the consequences and the impacts of a metropolitan project. The model of metropolitan system under influence of the project's external inputs is mapped with the impact scenario maps in the metropolitan existing situation analysis process to understand the impact of the project in the metropolitan context. It is a tool to evaluate whether the specific project reaches the general criteria provided by the policy, systemic set of ideas, guidelines, and parameters that provide an optimal solution. The impact scenario maps are designed to bring up issues that otherwise would not be considered by the critical reading of the underlying forces in the metropolitan systems. It allows decision makers to evaluate the impact of the metropolitan planning and project and to create a framework to monitor the execution of a strategy. Each metropolitan case study has specific metropolitan dynamics that contribute to the selection of the operators needed to compose the basic maps of metropolitan cartography. Synthetic maps and value charts are the basic maps of the metropolitan cartography that describe the physical structure of the territory related to the wet and dry infrastructures and the living conditions of the metropolitan dwellers. It is necessary to study the ecosystem of open data sources following specific criteria to select and extract required informative levels for the synthetic maps and the value charts. The Metropolitan Existing Situation Analysis Informative Level Catalog integrates the perception of system and environment that are reflected in the intention of the project of metropolitan planning and projects. Every settlement, city, region, and country needs a different analysis of cultural values that frame the very local complexity. This is why it is important to understand how to connect the informative level and the actual metropolitan territory. The synthetic maps analyze, interpret, and design the metropolitan structures, considering an underlying physical framework made by the intersections between networks of the wet and dry ground. Often, the boundaries amongst green, gray, and blue infrastructures are not clear. Therefore, we use the terminology wet and dry to emphasize the continuum of the territory. Each node of this metropolitan structure is described considering the geographical context at different scales in a specific spatiotemporal extent. The metropolitan structures within the territorial resources is essential in framing the future development of metropolis management. For example, water-related disasters already account for 90% of all natural disasters. According to the intention of the project, infrastructure of flood protection and drainage and water storage facilities are required to avoid the natural disasters. Reduction, preparation, and prevention of such risks are investments that reduce victims, prevent damages, and support long-term economic growth. The risk-related synthetic maps represent how environmental risks impact on the metropolitan structures, influencing the equilibrium of wet and dry territory. The value charts capture the actual everyday living environment of millions of metropolitan dwellers by describing the urban public-private relationship and the access to public services and resources such as water, energy, culture, information, and many others. Values charts are not abstract infographics because they consider the impact on the geographical context. For example, the energy availability, affordability, and accessibility is a metropolitan issue. According to the intention of the project, access to electricity must be guaranteed using renewable resources and reaching the largest number of dwellers. The extension of the electrical grid and the price of electricity contribute in shaping the dynamics of a settlement and the rules of the socio-ecological pattern of public spaces. The related value chart represents how the settlement structure is influenced by the extension of the electrical grid and how the socio-economical dynamics in this structure is influenced by the price of electricity.